Yeah, that's fine. I think you said you're not going to use. Oh,
I'm just going to
And then
once I give over to you, I'll give over to you.
give you over to me and then introduce yourself.
Good evening, everybody. I'm standing on my toes because this mic is a little bit high. So. Thank you, Franz. I don't touch these things. For those who don't know me, my name is Antoinette Slavitt. I'm a journalist with Rapport for only a few months that I have left there because the paper is closing, as you've heard. Yeah, it's cold outside, but you came. We are also keeping our eyes on the TV to see whether we get a government. But despite that requirement to look at the news, you are all here. Thank you so much. Today, interesting subject, and it's all about vaping. It's a fairly new thing on our horizon, the vaping, and the regulations don't or haven't kept up with these developments. But we're going later on tonight. Frans will give us all our press club announcements, and Albie will introduce all our guests. And of course, later tonight we'll have a raffle, and we have very nice prizes, some of those that you can drink, and some of the house. So for the time being, I hope everyone has got something to drink, otherwise you can go and get at the bar. But enjoy the evening, we are relaxed, we are not formal here, there will be time to ask questions, and there give over to Albie Modise. He's our facilitator for the evening, and he will introduce all our lovely guests. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to conversation under the auspices of the National Press Club, working in collaboration with the Vapor Products Association of South Africa. And tonight, as The focus is on demystifying, explaining, sharing information, clearing the air, but at the same time educating everyone about the industry. The conversation is quite an important one as we look at understanding the legislation that regulates, governs, but also brings semblance of order within the industry and specifically on the tobacco bill. But also use this particular gathering to share with members of the media that are here this evening and communications practitioners, influencers in different formats of the industry itself. But let me, without much further ado, welcome the panel members that are joining the immediate left. And that's Asanda Koi. Asanda is the Chief Executive Officer for the Vapor Products Association of South Africa, VPASA. She's the Chief Executive of VPASA, a non-profit or rather not-for-profit organization that represents manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers of smoke-free vapor products in the country. Dynamic businesswoman, she also has over 16 years experience across the diverse industries, including 5 years as an entrepreneur, and I learned as we are from the journalistic background. So we have a friend in her. Asanda, good evening and welcome. Thank you. And Dr. Kosile Tlape, quite a popular voice with strong views on a wide range of issues. Anyone who follows health debates will have to know Dr. Tlape. Dr. Tlape is the MD ophthalmologist. Now I know why I didn't do medicine science at school, Doc. Well, that group that ended up in the maths and in the history and geography. African Medical Association. He's a current president and co-founder of Africa Harm Reduction Alliance. His career also includes leadership roles such as past president of the Health Professional Council of South Africa and chairman of the board of the South African Medical Association. He's a strong advocate for universal healthcare access and harm reduction. So he comes in here wearing later. That's in the horizon. And we'll focus on the issue around tobacco harm reduction, South Africa's opportunity to reduce the public health burden. Doc, good evening and welcome. We are all ready for this conversation. Let me also say hi, good evening to Dr. Pruti Edward Makotlo. Dr. Makotlo is a renowned expert in regulatory affairs, public health, and scientific engagement with a PhD in infection immunity from the University of West Germany. He has significantly advanced tobacco harm reduction, contributing to key regulatory frameworks and scientific strategies featured in publications like the Business Day and Retail Brief Africa. Smoke-free future through scientific innovation and public health advocacy. And he will look at the topic of differentiating vaping and smoking, a concise overview. Doc, good evening. We extend a very warm National Press Club welcome to Barry Bachman. Barry is based in Johannesburg. He's currently the CEO of the Vaporite and a former SAA pilot. So we fly with you tonight, Barry, as we tabulate and we traverse the turbulent skies that seek to define the environment operates. He's got vast experience in running South Africa's largest vape shop retail chain for a decade and involvement in all aspects of the South African vaping industry. His skill sets include leadership, marketing, and customer service. Bachman also contributes valuable insight to the industry in his position as a director of the Vapor Products Association of South Africa. And his topic that he's tackling would be future of vaping in South Africa and industry perspective. Of the media, we will now kick off with a presentation from Ms. Asanda Koi, CEO of Vapor Products Association of South Africa and Regulation. And that's all we. Thank you. I know it was a long day, but it promised to be quite an illuminating evening. Thank you.
Thank you. There. Yeah, I think so. Is that okay? Okay. Yes, I think that's more like it. Thank you very much, Mr. Modise, for that introduction, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, thank you so much for taking this cold winter evening. I know most of you would have much rather been at home, but alas, you are here, so we do appreciate it. And a very special thank you to the National Press Club for affording us this opportunity. We do not take it for granted. The Vapor Products Association of South Africa, of which I am the Chief Executive Officer, has spent the past going about the role of tobacco harm reduction in reducing tobacco-related diseases in South Africa. Chief among our aims has been to society, including media, to recognize that electronic nicotine and non-nicotine delivery systems, better known as, can actually play a significant part in reducing the harm resulting from smoking. Part of doing this is to put in place a differentiated regulatory framework that makes vaping products more attractive to smokers as an alternative, while at the same time ensuring that non-smokers and young people are kept from initiating nicotine addiction. This is ongoing work that we hope the 7th administration and Parliament will take up with a very open mind. As you will hear from some of the speakers tonight, vapor products are scientifically proven to smoked tobacco. I repeat, vaping products are scientifically proven to be a less harmful alternative to smoked tobacco. Important for all of us, especially for you that hold various platforms, to recognize this reality in order to ensure that smokers, South African smokers more in particular, do not fall into the trap of believing that vapor products are more harmful than smoking, because that is not correct. Therefore, our starting point should always be the science, and let this lead us in all our commentary. Recent statistics put South African smokers, 28% of South Africans are smokers. That is a scary statistic. Where smoking numbers are meant to be going down in South Africa over the years, they should concern each and every person that is here because of what we know about the harms of tobacco. But let me not go ahead of myself. I was told, so I will do that and introduce Dr. Kgosi Letlape. Those of you on the health space have met or heard from Dr. Letlape. He is a passionate advocate for smokers' rights, especially their right to be properly informed about alternatives to their smoking. Letlape, to hearing what you have to say. And with those few words, let me hand over to Dr. Letlape. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm not sure. This is the first time as a member of parliament. So I don't know whether to talk about I'm part of the 7th administration or not, because that seems to be a poison chalice. You know, we might end up going back to vote again before some of us can sit in parliament, the way things are going. How many days do I have to talk so that I can time myself? I've been asked to talk about, set the scene, about principles of harm reduction. So I will not start about talking about tobacco harm reduction. I'll talk about harm reduction in general. And basically, we apply harm reduction to largely. sometimes inevitable harm that can come in society. For example, when we had COVID, because you could get the infection, there were strategies that were devised to reduce the harm associated with COVID. Some of those harm reduction strategies were, isolation, but more importantly, picking up the people that carry the virus, isolating them, and making vaccines available. We couldn't really cure the virus. Those of you that have kids know that there's a vaccination card that has to be filled. That's to reduce harm because of the, say, if you get measles or you get mpox and you're not vaccinated and you're a vulnerable person, to you. But harm reduction is even much, much more innocuous than that. I love cars. And I'll give you an example that relates to cars. The biggest problem with making cars safe is it's easy to come up with a big engine and high speed. But the safety, there are lots of engines that have not been put into production cars because it was not safe for them to brake. You couldn't come up with brake. We love cars, but cars can be harmful. Cars can kill. But nobody's going to say walk because cars are dangerous. So we work on how do we make cars safe. So issues of 3-point safety belts that came from the Swedes is to reduce harm. Because when people were involved in car crashes, they would be thrown out. So they die from being thrown out of the car. So when you restrain them in the seat, brake failure, introducing anti-lock braking systems. That's a harm reduction strategy. So harm reduction is innocuous. It's in there, in everything that we do. When you cross the street in an urban environment, you'd be advised to cross it at a pedestrian crossing. Markings. In South Africa, if you've seen the markings before, you know where they are supposed to be. But they might not be there because they haven't been painted in the last 5 years. But if you cross a street at a level crossing, waiting for a green robot, your chances of being safe across the street are much higher. So when you jaywalk, your chances of being run over are high. So these are all harm reduction strategies. If you have an abusive partner, and you know that when he's got money in his pocket, when he's end on Friday, you're going to be. You can come up with a harm reduction strategy where, when it's Friday, you visit your mother-in-law so that you don't get bitten. That's a strategy to reduce harm. When you know you got friends that get you into trouble, they'll pick you up on a Friday. You try not to be when they come, so that you can reduce harm to yourself. So it's an innocuous thing that we do. And where it is applicable in health, it's where you have behaviors that people can't avoid, but they can harm themselves from those behaviors. If I remember, I qualified in the HIV came out in the mid-80s. And we used to say, we're happy that HIV came after we left university. We would not have survived. Some of us may not have survived. But you know that HIV is a sexually transmitted infection. And you can't tell people to stop having sex. So you then have to look at how can you ensure that you improve the safety associated with this pleasurable activity called sex. So you educate them about reducing partners, using condoms, safe sexual practices. And you now have today modern ways of encounter. Pre-exposure prophylaxis, post-exposure prophylaxis. All those issues are harm reduction strategies because you have a behavior. Now, when it comes to tobacco, where I start as a physician is to say that, to inform people that smoking kills. Smoking will kill 1 in 2 of its users in their lifetime. So if you smoke for more than 40 years, for a lifetime, you got a smoking. You will die, half of you will die from smoking. It causes the most preventable cause of death is from smoking. 3 billion smokers in the world. In South Africa, we have 12 to 13 million South Africans that smoke. So you can try and wish it away, you can try. Advice that we would give is quit. But if you can't quit, we don't abandon you. That's not what we do as the medical profession. So we meet where you are. There are other examples of harm reduction in medicine. When you have people that are addicted to heroin, put them in the street, you bring them into a care facility, you give them methadone, which is a less harmful way of getting you high, and you try and help wean them off the heroin and eventually wean them off the methadone. When we had high transmission rates of HIV and AIDS for intravenous drug users, even clean needles, there was an uproar to say you are encouraging them to have drugs, but people have accepted. So in most civilized countries, they have needle exchange programs where you give people that are addicted clean needles. When they do Bluetooth in the street here, you don't want them to be reusing the needles, sharing them amongst themselves, because you reduce harm. So harm reduction is something that is embedded in what we do. Now, when it comes to tobacco, we've known 60 years. The Surgeon General's report was in 1962. The Royal College of Physicians report was in 1960, that the greatest problem with tobacco is combusting it. But remember also that the fastest way to deliver nicotine is through a combustible cigarette. Because when you burn it, and goes into the small alveoli of the lungs, gets into the bloodstream very quickly, and it can be detected in your bloodstream, and you get your heat in your brain very quickly. Very few have that delivery. There are few when you can come up with different nicotine salts where you can get close to that. But that is an effective way of delivering nicotine. It is also a cheap way of delivering nicotine. So, but it is the most dangerous form of getting your nicotine. When you burn tobacco, over 7,000 chemicals. And about 18 or 24 of those have been identified by both the WHO, World Health Organization, and the only products of combustion. So the major harm caused by tobacco is from combusting. It's not that the non-combustible way is innocuous or it's harmless. That's why we're not talking about harmless. We talk about reducing. Now, when you avoid combustion, you can get your nicotine in a less harmful way. Interesting story before we come to vapes. The FCTC was signed in 2003. It was ratified in 2003. At the time that the FCTC was ratified, there were very few alternatives to combustible cigarettes. The only thing that was on the market was smokeless tobacco, just snuff. Now, a scientist whose father died from a lung-related disease in Sweden was a smoker himself. And he He knew that you'll die, you'll have less harm from snuff. But he didn't like the unhygienic thing of spitting, putting it everywhere. You got grannies that use snuff. You know what the challenges are. So he came up with a simple solution of putting it in a sachet, like in a tea bag, and having it that way. So in 1973, for the first time, a product was put on the Swedish market called snus, where they basically took the snuff that they'd been using for over 200 years, put it in a sachet, and that's for hygiene. By the time the FCTC was signed, they had been using snus for nearly 20 years, from 73. WHO decided that snus should be banned. Now here's the interesting story. The company that produced the snus in Sweden was also producing cigarettes. But when they saw that the non-combustible tobacco cost less, they could not continue selling cigarettes. They sold their cigarette business and concentrated on snus. Companies called Swedish Match. Because of that, the Swedes have been having access to snuff in a sachet called snus for the last. Have an epidemiological study second to none. So because they encourage people to have snus, two things happened in Sweden. The incidence of combustible cigarette use has gone down to 5.6%. The incidence of nicotine, overall nicotine use, 17-18%. So they are at the same level as other European countries. But only 5.6% is from combustible cigarettes. A global health report of 2022 showed that the Swedish men have the lowest incidence of tobacco-related diseases, cardiovascular diseases, have nearly half the amount of disease compared to their European counterparts. What's the explanation? Snus. So snus has displaced combustible cigarette in the Swedish environment, but it has not increased the overall prevalence of use of nicotine. So it's still the same as in other countries. They are not the most compliant with the M-Power from the FCTC, but they have, because they embraced non-combustion. 2013, a pharmacist, Conhon Lee, common history with the others. His father died from lung cancer. He was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. He invented the modern day electronic cigarette. So it's only from 2013 that you had a viable alternative to the combustible cigarette, except for the smokeless tobacco. That's 10 years after the FCTC was signed. Now remember I told you about the fact that it came to the industry was knowingly killing us from the 60s. Between 62 and 2003, that's 40 years, there were no real alternatives. But the prevalence of smoking in the US dropped from more than 50% of doctors smoking than 25%. So the incidence of smoking was half between 62 and 2000. Why? Knowledge. The truth came out that smoking kills. So the truth came out about the Marlboro Man. And when people were given the information, they made informed decisions. There was no prohibition, there was no legislative framework, but when people viruses. And smoking prevalence came down by more than 50% without any hardcore educational programs, just from people having the knowledge. Now, if there's one thing that I hope you take out from what I'm saying to you, is the fact that you can make informed decisions. And when you tell people the truth, they will make the right decisions. There's still the element of choice. I mean, in Sweden, women didn't like snus for whatever reason. So they continued with smoking. So Swedish women, the incidence of tobacco-related diseases is no different from other women in Europe. So you have a nature, because the Swedes keep statistics that will show you that there's evidence that the problem is with combustion. With combustion, you're going to have less harm. Now, how does an electronic cigarette work? But before after 2003, in the medical field, because there's a guy called Michael Russell who was a physician in South Africa before he left for the UK in 1976 or 78. Michael Russell said, people who smoke for the nicotine, but they die from it. So because of that knowledge, the pharmaceutical companies developed nicotine replacement therapies in the form of tablets, champagnes, in the form of lozenges, in the form of patches. So we knew that combustion is the problem. And that's why we have nicotine replacement therapy. It doesn't exist in South Africa because you're trying to save money and you're not providing better healthcare and information to our people. But it's a well-established thing. Now, that nicotine in nicotine replacement therapy is no different from the nicotine in vaping products or in other products. So, what e-cigarettes are or what vapes are, it's basically the nicotine from tobacco. But nicotine is very bitter. So it's colorless, it's bitter, and it's smokeless. So what you do, you take the nicotine, you put flavors in it, then you put propylene glycol or glycerin in it. That's the artificial smoke that you guys see in concerts. So that has been added to the nicotine so that you can have something that you see. Because people that smoke, they seem to get addicted to the clouds that they produce. So when you get rid of the clouds, so that's what's in there and that's what you see. But what a vape is, it's an electronic device that vaporizes nicotine. That's what it is. Now I have a question. If it's from prescription, the nicotine is great. But if it's over the counter and you can buy it yourself, suddenly it's demonic. Something doesn't add up. The tragedy about tobacco harm reduction is that there are people who have careers from hating the industry. I'm not sure if there's anything to laugh. I'm sorry, my friend. It's one of those things where people who smoke are not seen. And it's the hatred for the industry that makes people come up with spurious arguments and argue on the other side of morality. Now, I'm just a physician. And my duty is, if you're going to harm yourself and you're addicted to that behavior, my duty is to help you, to teach you about alternatives. Whether it's just addiction to food and you have to sit with you, help you, tell you what the alternatives are. So the key issue is about knowledge. And what I want you to take from here is that if you avoid combustion, you will greatly reduce harm. Now, there are a few products that are on the market now that are non-combustible. Vaping, and the biggest problem for vaping is youth uptake. Because youth love fancy things. 2 days ago, 2 years ago, we had the tragedy of the Enyobeni tavern, where 22 young people died from alcohol. 2 young people, let's ban alcohol. We need to address the issue of youth uptake, but it needs to be dealt with as a separate issue. Million South Africans that smoke, 20 to 40,000 of them die every year. Those are the deaths that we need to prevent. And educating them about the alternatives to combustion is key to reducing those deaths. So, the way you do not combust is to extract the nicotine using an electronic device. You can take the tobacco, put it into what they call a heat not burn product, where you heat the tobacco but you don't vaporize it. I've spoken about snus. Available since around 2018, which is nicotine pouches. So they now take nicotine powder with cellulose, put it in a sachet, and that's. And studies show that the harm associated with the nicotine pouch is the same as the harm associated with nicotine replacement therapy. But the people that are high harm reduction. So people who smoke deserve better. Harm reduction is relevant for all people, even for people, even in tobacco. Lastly, now that I'm a policymaker, I'm happy that our tobacco bill has not been approved yet, and it will be brought back to Parliament for scientific scrutiny and proper evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Klape, for that insightful presentation. Just saw Press Club YouTube page, as well as on Facebook page as well. While also still on that matter related to National Press Club, we have a raffle opportunities. Using a card, you'll be able to tap and get the opportunity to win, getting closer and closer to you, much closer than the announcement of a cabinet. Can I now invite Dr. Puti Edward Makotlo, who's going to talk to us around differentiating vaping and smoking, a concise overview. You know, the way the economy, the world changes. I read a few days ago about challenges that MultiChoice is having in terms of audience. Total has changed to become Total Energy, no longer oil. Even within the space here, there's vaping. I didn't know vaping until a few years ago, and I'm studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Tough one to follow, Doc. Yeah, but please call me Eddie. I just thought of something to add to what Doc was saying. Another example that we live with every day in terms of harm reduction. Your Coke Zero, it's a form of harm reduction, right? When they introduced the sugar tax and so on, it people for the diabetes and so on. So it is a form of, so we live with harm reduction every single day. Whether you have a 0% or 0.5% alcohol drink, it's a form of harm reduction. Yeah. So it's not a concept that is new. I think Doc summed it up very well. So I'm not going to dwell so much into the gentleman there who we call the father of tobacco. That's Michael Russell, who, as Doc said, people seek nicotine, but they die from tar, right? Not proven evidence to show any harm with nicotine, and that's the misconception. A lot of people think it causes cancer. It doesn't. This has been proven, and I'll go into my slides now to just show you some evidence and some well-known, respected institutions of cancer research globally that have demystified that. Could you? Thank you. Next. To harm reduction, or THR. We like acronyms, right? So follow me when I say THR, tobacco harm reduction. What you need first is a product. You need people to move to a product that is going to give the same satisfaction as, right? And so vaping product is exactly that. Your snus is exactly that. It's a delivery system. Your Nicorette is exactly that. It's a delivery system to give you the nicotine without the 7,000 harmful chemicals that are released when you combust. And you need smokers to completely switch to those products. So one of the things that I'll come to is how many, of these countries that have transitioned, I think, and put the right regulatory frameworks in place and encourage people. And you see those stats reduce. Sweden, it's many other countries. So next one. So, like I say, nicotine. Let's demystify it. Nicotine is, what can I compare it with? Caffeine, right? It's the same thing. Same way or physiological effect that you would get from your caffeine. So nicotine in itself, it's a naturally produced amount. How many of you had potatoes today? Tomatoes? Eggplants? Okay, I'm going too far. But you get nicotine from potatoes, you get nicotine from tomatoes. Although at very low amounts, nicotine is there. It's a naturally occurring compound that we consume on an everyday basis. So how do we say that it's harmful if we consume it every day? Right? What's going on?
I'm trying to get the slide to show its
Okay, that's fine. So this has been demonstrated or talked about by, like Doc said, the Royal College of Physicians in London, in the UK, the WHO, by the way, in itself, would say or promote your Nicorette products or your e-cigarettes. It now is contrary to that. So there's been many organizations. The International Research has come out to say nicotine is not harmful. It is addictive. And trust me, to get somebody off smoking is tough. That's why you get people that always relapse, right? It's very tough for somebody to completely quit. Doc can tell you. Yep. Next. Mm-hmm. In this e-cigarette that we talk about, typically the device itself is made of three core parts. Yeah, battery, an atomizer, and an e-liquid. In that e-liquid, there are, as Doc said, a few ingredients: propylene glycol or vegetable glycerine, water, nicotine, and flavorings. That's it. Yeah, that do not have nicotine. So typically, what people do is that they would start, yes, with the highest strength of nicotine, especially those that smoke quite heavily. They will start with the higher strength and then wean down. I know a lot of people that have weaned down to zero nicotine. Suddenly, completely no need for nicotine. So it is effective in that way, right? There is no tobacco in e-cigarettes or in that e-liquids, none whatsoever. Yep. There's no smoke, there's no ash. Yeah. So in terms of the framework and what we need to do, evidence exists already. And to this day, I'm surprised that you still get people that say we don't know enough about it. There is plenty of evidence. Whether you look at the chemistry, the toxicology, whether you look at the behavior, the PKPD, this is pharmacology, and how the body reacts back to the nicotine. There's plenty of evidence in that space. Clinical exposure. We know about the cancer that nicotine does. And there has been population studies, or at least associations that you see in several countries, where the uptake of these products, you see less and less. More importantly, you see disease being reduced in those countries, or tobacco-related diseases being reduced in those countries. So there's a level for this. When COVID started, we did not know much about what we're going to do to curb the spread or the transmission of COVID. What we started with was modeling studies, which we accepted of how we should do things. There has been modeling studies that actually show, even for South Africa, Germany, US, Canada, and so on, that actually show people completely from cigarettes to to e-cigarettes. You are able to save millions and millions and able to reach WHO targets of less than 5% smoking rates in the country. So evidence is there. It's just somehow deliberately being, and you look at the references that are put there or embedded in there for this bill. None of them speak to this part. None of them. Deliberately so. And there's plenty of it. If we go next. As Doc said, back in 2014, a professor called Professor Nutt proposed this modeling, right? It's a spectrum of looking at different products that you get nicotine from. Or extreme toxicity would be your combustibles. So the brown that you see here, these are combustibles. Your cigarettes, your cigars, your water pipe. extreme toxicity. And then as you move to the left, and this is scientifically proven, right? As you move to the left, far, your snus, which Doc talked about, your e-cigarettes, your nasal sprays, your nicotine pouches, which are fairly new in the markets, and your patches and so on. Now, what's important to realize with this is that also there is evidence that has been shown that there is no serious adverse effects when you compare your nicotine patches, which are approved here in to your nicotine pouches, for example, right? So the main concern currently is youth uptake that we should worry about. And I think the industry has been forthcoming to say, yes, they are not against the regulations, but the right regulation and appropriate regulations have to be put in place and be science or evidence-based. It's a big with youth uptake, and that's the mechanisms that needs to be put in place. No child should be under 18 should be taking up e-cigarettes or vaping. No child under 18 should be, or no adult smoker, non-smoker should be taking, because nicotine is addictive after all. So the encouragement is that it should be for over 18s, and it should be adult smokers that are finding it hard to quit. There's plenty of evidence. I've just put a few that intoxicants are between 82 to 99%, right? And this is those chemicals that have been deemed by the WHO or the FDA. So you take a cigarette, e-cigarette, and you measure the constituents between the two using that list. Over 82%, some studies reporting over 99% reduction in those harmful constituents that you find in. Yep. There has been of recent biomarker studies. So a biomarker is a marker of disease. It's a marker of disease. So for example, if you get an infection, how do they tell that you have an infection? There's a biological response and something you can measure to say, dog has this infection, for example, right? There's biomarkers for cardiovascular disease, there's biomarkers for lung disease, there's biomarkers for COPD, and so on. So biomarkers have been measured in many studies as well that show actually that non-smoker and actually have the same levels of biomarkers in terms of tobacco-related diseases. Again, public health, one thing I need to mention, in the UK, when was it, 2022, the UK incentivized e-cigarettes just to encourage people to get off smoking. If you look at the UK results right now, they are heading towards the Swedish experience as well. And that's because they allow these products to be firstly accessible to be available, and to be right. If you see here in terms of the UK, you can see in the blue would be your sales for e-cigarettes. Sorry, in the blue it's your combustible cigarettes, and in the red or orange here you can see the uptake. And you can see some association, or at least the trend, that with the uptake, you actually, your e-cigarettes, you actually reduce your FMC sales. This has happened for different products. Sweden with or snus, in Japan with THP, which is a tobacco heated product. In New Zealand, and since then they've had a 4.3 decline in smoking rates. 2020 to 2023. Even applying the Empower recommended by the WHO, you would not see such a significant reduction in smoking rates. And that's because the government realized that encouraging and putting the right regulations and demystifying these products would lead to this. In the UK, I've just given an example in the UK what their regulatory framework is. They categorize it as products, but they don't excise it. We've got excise here. You put excise on a product, it becomes unaffordable. Remember the 3 A's I said: accessible, affordable. Excise here in South Africa. The UK didn't. Health warnings are important because you have to talk about the addictiveness of nicotine. You have to warn people about the addictiveness of nicotine. They allow all flavors. They've got a cap on the concentration of your nicotine. But these are things in the current regulatory framework. We've spoken about Sweden again, just % smoking rates in Sweden. Yep. I had to give one more example where it's the opposite. You look at Brazil, another example is Australia, right? When you put restrictive measures, strict measures, you actually get the opposite effect. Never mind the illicit market that you're going to have an issue with in take. You get people smoking or vaping what they don't know is in there. So that creates a flourish of that. As I said, it's difficult to get off nicotine, right? But at least give leeway and the right regulatory framework for these products. But in summary, there is high certainty of evidence that there's one more study I didn't talk about here, and it's the Cochrane review, that speaks about a comparison between e-cigarettes as well as nicotine replacement therapy. And there is high certainty that using e-cigarettes better than they would using NRTs. It's a fact. It's a Cochrane review, the highest level of evidence when we speak about hierarchy of science. There's reduced toxicant studies that exist. reduced markers of disease that has been demonstrated for these products. The safety profile is similar to NR. Seeing positive outcomes in terms of those countries that have embraced the concept of harm reduction. Yes, regulation is needed here in South Africa. Let's make it science or evidence regulation. WHO does not work. The same bill that we see here is the same bill that you would see in Uganda and many other. It does not work. You need an augmented regulatory framework to embrace these products into there's an opportunity, and I'm glad Doc is here and is an MP to make some changes or some noise from within. But there is an opportunity for South Africa to curb the smoking rates. Our of having less than 5% to reach it. I can tell you the smoking for South Africa keep going up, and we need to embrace products in order to have a better future for our South Africans or our smokers. Thank you so much. Yep.
You may want to remove the microphone, Eddie. I know a member of parliament in the UK who took the mic with him into the car, and then he started confessing about the people he left behind. And the speaker was announcing what was said in the car. Dr. Leklape, you arrive in parliament with that. So you won't practice that when you arrive in parliament. Let me now invite, ladies and gentlemen, Barry Brockman, who's the CEO of Vaporite, and a pilot as Barry takes us off and of vaping in South Africa and insider's perspective.
Barry? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I won't be able to speak as off the cuff as the other presenters because plenty of practice with their subjects, but for me, I was given the subject, and it took a while to put it all together because I'm dealing with the vaping industry in South Africa, literally. I would love to deal with some of the subjects and some about it, industry and what we achieve. Anyway, so before I start, I had some slides, but they're not up. But I put up a crystal ball, and the reason I put up a crystal ball was when I was given this topic and they said, what is the future of vaping in South Africa? I said, because the regulations, the legislation, the taxation, the way the industry is growing is so dynamic that it's almost impossible to forecast where we're going to be 6 months from now, a year, and definitely not 2 years from now. Okay, I am the founder of Vaporite, and we are South Africa's largest vape retailer and the largest vape retail chain by number of stores. In addition to retail, we are also a manufacturer and we're a wholesaler. And then, as you know, I'm also a director and board member of the Vapor Products Association of. I grew up in Port Elizabeth. My grandfather was very liberal. He was an ANC beneficiary. He had a feature in his house in Cape Road, Port Elizabeth. He has a trapdoor in his lounge, and they used to have meetings where they used to come down the side of the house and climb up through the trapdoor into his lounge to have meetings, and that trapdoor actually still exists today. As such, my parents wanted me out of South Africa. They wanted me and my brothers out of South Africa because of the apartheid system. So in 1986, they sent me and my middle brother to America. green card because his mother had moved there in the 1970s. And then my parents and my youngest brother followed 2 years later. While I was in the USA, I pursued a career as a pilot in the US Army. In 1995, after the ANC came into power, I then spent 2 years flying for the Red Cross and the United Nations in mostly war-zone countries such as Angola and Afghanistan. In 1995, I was hired by South African Airways and spent 23 years with the airline, and I've flown literally every aircraft. I then opted for a retrenchment package in 2020 when the airline was exiting business rescue. So you might ask, how does an airline pilot? Why? As much as I was and still am a bit of a health fanatic, eating mostly healthy food and barely touching alcohol, I had one vice, which I knew wasn't healthy, which I knew would probably kill me, and which I desperately combustible cigarettes. In 2013, I discovered a product called the Clearo being sold by Twisp, and I think everyone here has heard of Twisp. I was immediately able to stop smoking cigarettes, and within a few weeks, my raspy breathing had cleared up. I felt fantastic. After around a year of vaping and astounded at my ability to have no desire to return to smoking cigarettes, as well as feeling healthier than ever, I believe that vaping was not only a great business opportunity, but something every smoker should have access to in order to help them to quit combustible. I attended an international vape show in Frankfurt, Germany, made the necessary contacts with suppliers, and VapeRight was born. We'll now talk about the actual. Although tobacco and other companies have been dabbling since the mid-1960s with alternatives for delivering nicotine in a way that didn't involve the first commercially viable electronic cigarette was only patented in 2003. And interestingly enough, it was invented by a Hong Kong, I don't know if he was a scientist, but he was something along that line, whose father had died of cancer, and he had died from smoking cigarettes. A safer way of delivering nicotine. The first electronic cigarettes were crude devices, and some even resembled an cigarette, and they were called cigalikes. 10 years later, roughly around the time I discovered vaping, the industry was still in its infancy and products were still relatively crude. From 2014 onwards, the industry exploded. Chinese hardware manufacturers started to deliver as far as e-liquid was concerned. As the industry developed and competition for market share intensified, mainly USA e-liquid companies started to market the industry towards younger people. There were events like cloud blowing competitions and trick. Some companies had full-time tricksters on staff who would attend international vape events, and they even earned somewhat of a celebrity. This led many people to believe that vaping was a fad. And I don't know how many times when I started my company, people said this is a fad, it's not an industry, it's not going to last long. And everyone thought that when people got over this fad, they'd all go back to smoking cigarettes. However, vaping was mainly for those under the age of 30. Millions of smokers who were looking for a healthier, safer, and more socially acceptable way to ingest nicotine started to switch to vaping. It makes sense that almost all of those over the age of 30 and possibly even over 20 who started vaping, people who start smoking don't start in their 20s, they don't start in their 30s. They don't even start at 19 or 20 or 18. They start when they're in their teens. They start when they're 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age. That's when most people first start experimenting with combustible tobacco. I believe it was at this juncture where former smokers started to use vape as a means of getting off combustible tobacco, that vaping moved from being a perceived fad to a major industry. In 2011, there were roughly 7 million people using electronic cigarettes globally. By 2020, this had increased to over 68 million. And well over that number. However, at the same time, in 2020, there were still 1.1 billion people smoking cigarettes. And sorry, that's the number that that the number of people using combustible tobacco is increasing. We'll now turn to the South African vape industry. Its infancy. The company that initially brought vaping to South Africa was Twisp. The company was founded in 2008. They were visionaries and market disruptors. Many people thought Twisp was a term for vaping and not the name of a company. There were times when we first started our company, people would walk into the store and say, Twisp. No, you actually vape. No, Twisp. No, Twisp is a company. Besides getting into the retail sector, and by that I mean kiosks, they were also the first to start supplying the FMCG market on the supermarket and petrol station chains. The initial vape shops were operated out of houses and slowly started to move to commercial locations from around 2015. Twisp had introduced kiosks in many of the major malls. E-liquid flavors initially very basic, with many only having one flavor concentrate, such as a specific fruit or a specific sweet flavor, like an apple or a caramel, as examples. Then international flavor influence created blended e-liquid, where more complex combinations started to appear, and the first South African e-liquid manufacturing companies were established. Even at this stage, many were operating from their homes and mixing in garages. Additionally, nicotine strengths were very low, mainly because the vaporizer systems being used at the time were of vapor. It was around 2015 that the industry really took off and vape shops and kiosks started to pop up in malls and shops around the country. The rate of hardware innovation by mostly Chinese manufacturers was unprecedented, and the variety and quality of both hardware and e-liquid were constantly improving. It was also around this time that nicotine salt e-liquid started to appear and could only be used in lower power. It was, in fact, Juul from the USA, and if you know anything about the industry, you'll know who Juul is. They developed the salt nicotine e-liquid through a company, PAX, which was a subsidiary of theirs, the manufacturer. It is manufactured in immediately, and therefore gives a similar fix, nicotine fix, as cigarettes would, compared to the standard e-liquid that we used to sell, which is baseline nicotine e-liquid. The growth of the local vape industry literally exploded from this point onwards. Major wholesalers were established to supply local shops, became multi-store brands like ours, and individual shops were opening up all over the country. The barrier to entry for opening a vape shop is very low. You find a location, you brand it, you fit it out with shop fitting, you contact a wholesaler and a few Chinese wholesalers and manufacturers, and you just place your orders and boom, you got a vape shop. That's how easy it is. Then big tobacco entered the scene in South Africa in 2019, when British American tobacco. The essential reason for buying Twist was the massive penetration Twist had in the FMCG market and their hugely valuable brand name and recognition, as well as their large number of kiosks nationwide. It was also around the same time that the Vapor Products Association of South Africa was established, due to the potential future threats the industry faced from government regulation and taxation. Ban. Quite a few vape shops went out of business, including one of the original vape shop chains, coincidentally by the name of Vape Shop, with 11 retail locations. 3 scenarios played out during the nicotine ban. Some vape retailers complied and did not operate, but this. Others, like Vape Rights, this is what we did, with an online presence, sold e-liquid containing trace amounts of CBD, as well as hardware to enable the use of the CBD e-liquid. This was legal, as CBD was not banned and falls under a medicinal category. Then there were many who simply sold all their existing stock of e-liquid containing nicotine to anybody who knew about the availability and who could pay in cash. And some retail sites for order and delivery. These 3 scenarios refer to the legal retail market. Legal meaning that they were selling high quality hardware and e-liquid and had been legally compliant prior to the ban. As for the black market, which was already in existence and thriving, there is no way to quantify quality hardware and e-liquid they were able to supply during this period. Then post-COVID. The landscape for the industry changed considerably post-COVID. The number of people vaping increased exponentially. And this could potentially have been due to many smokers only having access to vape products during the nicotine, the effect that COVID had on people's mindset about their personal health. I think COVID really changed the mindsets of a lot of people. When we started seeing people dying, who were just dying from something that popped up, health suddenly became a major priority in people's lives. Because vaping is correctly perceived as being far less harmful than smoking combustible, and then just when the industry started stabilizing and was able to consolidate product ranges and offerings, along came the disposable vape. These products initially appeared as single-use devices where the battery was not rechargeable and should essentially carry enough charge to last long enough to use all of the e-liquid in the way. This is where I believe we lost control of the ability to control underage vaping. It must be noted that there is no legal age limit for vaping in South Africa. And I need to say that again, there is no legal age limit currently for vaping in South Africa, because vaping is not regulated. However, all VPASA members, made up of a limited number of retailers and wholesalers and manufacturers, we subscribe to a code that they will not sell or market vape products to anyone under 18 years of age. If you visit any reputable vape store, specifically those who are members of VPASA, you will find posters and notices proudly stating that sales to under 18s are not allowed. Age verification is enforced. Unfortunately, the disposable vape has proliferated as a vape of choice for FMCG retailers and petrol stations. There is literally no age verification at the thousands of these retailers who sell these products. And for any person under 18 who wants to vape, they can get a disposable vape quite easily. They are easy to use and easy to hide. They are also extremely expensive compared to traditional vaping devices and e-liquid. Most worryingly, connections to FMCG have entered the market and only supply 50 milligram disposable products. Now, 50 milligrams is 5% nicotine. You either hear about 5% or you hear about 50 milligrams, 2%, 2 milligrams, sorry, 20 milligrams. I'm talking about 50 milligrams, is very addictive, extremely addictive, and extremely harsh. Most adult vapors would only use a maximum of 25 milligram nicotine strength, or 2.5%, and many far lower. But for the youth, they will buy what they can, where they can, and from wherever will sell to them. E-liquid. Despite so-called industry consultation, the Department of Finance did not take any of the arguments and concerns of the industry into account and simply bulldozed through what they had originally proposed. I honestly believe we wasted our time during the consultations. They weren't there to listen to boxes. The tax rate punishes users of low-strength nicotine and encourages users to move to higher-strength nicotine, increasing their addiction. I mean, if you like alcohol and you had a bottle of beer, a 300 ml bottle of beer that was being taxed at the same rate, 80% straw rum, would you buy the straw rum and consume it in small amounts, or would you buy the beer which is the same price? You're going to buy the one with the higher levels of alcohol. Country cigarettes are now ridiculously cheap compared to vaping. And I'm talking about the legal cigarettes. We're not even talking about the illicit trade. The population are now discriminated against, as they can't afford to use vaping as a harm-reduced form of feeding their nicotine habit, or as a cessation. The black market is booming. Besides reputable retailers, one can go to any store, any China mall, and find e-liquid still being sold at pre-excise tax prices. Black market manufacturing is in full swing. And when I say any store, I'm not talking about the reputable vape stores. I'm talking about, you can go to, if they still call them cafes, I don't know what they call them anymore, all over the place. To give an example of how the black market works, this was a personal experience. I was made aware that a retailer in Jeffreys Bay was selling e-liquid with the same branding as one of our brands, with a slight twist on the name. Because I live in St. Francis Bay, I work out of Joburg, but I live in St. Francis Bay. One time over, I visited this vape shop. I saw the e-liquid and asked the salesperson, it's their brand, it's our brand. I said, okay. So I asked him, where do they get it from? No, they have someone who makes it for them in a garage. You know, that's how it's not a complicated product to make. And that's what's happening. Then there are importers who declare incorrect import codes for disposables and avoid paying the excise tax until they get caught one day. The few industry players who comply with all the laws and also take the issue of not supplying under 18s very seriously. And then my next paragraph, or to end, I call it the final straw. The one that may break the industry's back. Pending government regulation could be the death of the legal industry. Shortage of illicit trade. Law-abiding, tax-compliant companies suffer from regulations and taxation, while criminals prosper due to ineffective and corrupt law enforcement. D-Day for the industry, at this stage we believe, is August 2025. This is when the government has indicated that they would like to have the new tobacco bill signed into law. And what is the future of the vaping industry in South Africa? My response is that I honestly have no idea. We will simply have to deal with everything the government and find ways to adapt and improvise. But at some point, if the regulatory and financial burden becomes too much, all that will be left is the black market. Vape retailers, manufacturers and wholesalers simply do not have the margins to survive this onslaught if it gets any worse. We can only hope that sanity and common sense will prevail, and that the government can be persuaded that although vaping is not harmless, a less harmful option for smokers who want to quit smoking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry, for taking us through the journey, but also debunking the myths, while at the same time clearing the confusion. It's that time where we open comments for compliments and all of that. But as we do that, the raffle tickets are outside. If you want to stand a chance to win some goodies, make sure that you get yourself a ticket. I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself and indicate who your question is directed at. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Klitter and I'm from Marula Media. It was very delightful to hear an organization that will lobby for, under 18s and all of that. But my question is, how hard and to whom are you lobbying? Obviously, just seeing is not going to do the trick. You're going to have to lobby with ministers and DGs to try, and not just from the departments, business and legislations also. So my question is, what will you guys be lobbying for? For no under 18s? Obviously, stricter. Just move the speaker a bit that way. Okay. So for stricter regulation, because of the, you don't know what you're going to buy when you walk into a cafe. You don't know what is in that product that they buy from, countries like China and all these other countries. So I definitely agree that there has to be legislation, but the right legislation. So how are you guys going to, as an organization, approach this, and what is the timeline?
Thank you, Peter. Maybe we can take some more questions or comments from the floor. Kurt, feel free to make an intervention from the floor as well. And yeah, maybe let's get response.
Thank you for that question. It's all of our work is on ensuring that the vaping industry is regulated. As the industry is not opposed to regulation, we actually want to be regulated because that's really what is going to help us to professionalize the industry as well as protect consumers. So in all our lobbying efforts, and I believe the fact that the bill has not been signed is due to our intensive lobbying efforts. So we have a multi-pronged approach where we don't just lobby you have to lobby business counterparts. So there are many supporting industries that the vaping industry is in. So we are in postage as well, for example. There's marketing, there's the vaping industry to ensure that we are able to trade. So from the onset, what we've said is the biggest challenge we have right now is at a consumer level, where you need ambassadors for these products. So it's one thing for me to go into a meeting in Parliament and talk on behalf of the industry. Oftentimes you hear people saying, of course you're going to say that. Why it's important that you always have a multi-pronged approach where business comes in and it ventilates the issues of business, and then you have independent experts who are in the tobacco harm reduction space that speak a different language. I cannot sway them and tell them this is what they need to say. They need to speak based on the science. And then you have consumers who say, I speak from my I used to be a smoker, I'm currently vaping. So you'll never ever have a one approach, that will work for this kind of work. And we've always said that information, because quite interestingly enough, the first time I ever went to Parliament, I was surprised to find that half the people there did not know what I was talking about. I assumed that going to debate, they knew about it, but because of misinformation and the media oftentimes not giving enough room for us to speak about these products, the people who will make the decisions, unfortunately, are not capacitated. So this kind of event is so important because on one hand, I can continue and go speak to the regulators, educate them about the industry, but you need the message to be reinforced. And the best way that the message is reinforced is through the media as well. So at any given point, you have to have a multi-pronged approach. This industry is taken seriously. And there was a question about, so one thing that we do agree with where government is concerned is that these products cannot be made, cannot be accessed by industry, was that over and above, Barry spoke about age gates and the signage and shops, etc. We've put forward to regulators to say, how about we look at a licensing. Is it going to work? We don't know. But what we are saying, let's open up conversation. Let's start looking at potential solutions to these problems that we have. And I believe that way, then we come up with a policy that is fit for purpose. Also wants to ask. Oh, and standards, sorry, he's reminded me. A very big development in the vaping industry has happened recently. The South African Bureau of Standards has approved South African vaping standards. Closing date is the 16th of July, and that is huge because it speaks to product safety. It speaks to those people who are making their vaping e-liquids in their. We are saying we cannot have that because these products are inhaled by individuals. We need to ensure that we are selling products that are of the best quality. Then we always say you buy from reputable stores because they have all your letters of authority when the likes of the NRCS says these products are of good quality. So don't ever buy products from flea markets and those kinds of things. But what is key right now is that we have reason to celebrate because for the first time South Africa is going to have vaping standards, and that's a biggie for us.
Thanks, Sandra. I think there's a follow-up question.
I think because of you are in the industry, maybe you should invite journalists to maybe do a documentary or an in-depth article, because you guys know where the film people in to buy the products, get it tested, to show that the impurities that's there, and I think that will also instill a bit of loyalty because of safety from trusted suppliers and shops, like those being associated with the Vapor Product Association.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh, Antoinette. Sorry, Antoinette, I did not see you.
Just want to know, with this tobacco bill, what is the most damaging section of the bill? I mean, what do they want to do with the bill that will impact on the industry? What is the worst part of it?
I'm not sure if I should ask or in the next round, Mr.
Response to Antoinette's question, and we'll get some more interventions, questions from the floor. So, yeah. Dr. Clark?
I think it would have been easier if your question was reversed. But what is the good part of the bill? And the answer would be none. What is the bad part of all of it? From the preamble to the end. For example, in the preamble, without putting it in black and white, they say everybody must quit. And it doesn't. The problem is not about the 70% South Africans who don't smoke. It's about the 28% who smoke and can't quit. So when you analyze it, it's not helpful to the people it's supposed to help. It just becomes like a cult document. The WHO and makes them equivalent to our constitution, which is a violation of what people went through to come up with that constitution, when it does not recognize people who smoke. If you look at the slide that was shown about cigarette being the most harmful way of getting your nicotine, and nicotine therapy as the least harmful, there's different degrees of harm, and the bill does not recognize that. It says anything that is not nicotine replacement therapy will be treated like a combustible cigarette, and that's written into the bill. And that's one of the major flaws, that it does not the aspects where it turns every home into a place of employment, and you're going to put up signs of where people can smoke, where they can't smoke, and people are not aware of those small things. So once it's passed, the cops can come and enforce and arrest you, because if you have a domestic, you're an employer. Or in the garden, if you haven't, you have not designated your employment space. The issue of what is an enclosed space. If you have one wall in the felt without other walls, that's an enclosed space, by definition in the bill. So I can go on and on. So there's no differentiation. Because those of us that are health activists, if you want to educate people about these things, will be violating that bill and will go to prison. It criminalizes smoking. It criminalizes the industry. There's sentences ranging from 3 months to 20 years. So it's criminalization of smoking. On the other side, cannabis, and we're decriminalizing like hell, and we want to industrialize, and we want to turn an industry into underground. So I mean, there's so much that is terrible in that bill that is not worth the piece of paper it's written on. But the key issue is lack of differentiation, saying everything is the same. If it's not a tablet, it's a cigarette, and it's to be regulated like a cigarette. So the taxation framework is terrible. Because if you can't differentiate, there will be no access, there will be no affordability, there will be no quality. And no ability to educate, except that the products are different. So I don't know if I've summarized. The only good thing about the bill is that it's black ink on.
Yeah.
I just wanted,
Yes.
no, I just wanted, Kurt, if you don't mind, just from a consumer point of view, just what she had asked about what is wrong with the bill, or if there's anything that's right from a consumer's point of view. Kurt Yao is one of South Africa's leading consumer activists. Organization called Vaping Saved My Life. So I think it would be good to hear from you, Kurt.
Good evening, everybody. I have to agree with Dr. Letlape. Nothing good about the bill currently is it hasn't been signed. The biggest issue is the differentiation between combustible tobacco and non-combustible tobacco. And as Dr. Letlape has correctly stated, the preamble talks about nicotine being dangerous. Nicotine has been dangerous, then we have to question why the World Health Organization has considered it as an essential medicine on the essential medicines list for nicotine replacement therapies. So nicotine, it starts off at the very, very beginning as a lie, that nicotine is not harmful. It's addictive. And obviously there is an old adage in medicine, and doctor, you can correct me on there, the dose makes applies to everything in pharmacological and medicine. So nicotine in the doses that we use is not harmful. So the bill starts off with a lie and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And Dr. Letlapa is quite correct. If you just look at section 2 of the bill, section 2(1)(a), I'm quite versed in all this. The definition of an enclosed space is one or more walls or a roof made out of any material at any permanent position. Technically, that's an umbrella. Smoking under an umbrella can fetch you 3 months in jail. Parts of this bill, the information that's provided, the way that people will be treated, is going to be detrimental. And sorry, Doc, I'm a big fan. Is that it literally doesn't address the very people that it needs to help. I agree, we need to protect non-smokers, non-vapers, the youth. I agree 100%. That's probably the only thing I do. But everything else is a complete and utter mess, because it's actually not talking to the people that are suffering, that cannot quit smoking, and will eventually die. Here's a horrible statistic. In the time that we've been sitting here having a chat, 2,700 people around the world have died from smoking. 8 million people die every single year. Smoking, only 4% are able to do it without assistance. And according to the FDA, it can take up to 30 attempts for someone to be successfully quitting smoking. No wonder we have a smoking problem in this country, because we don't have cessation services, we don't have cessation support, we don't have the medications, we don't have the therapeutics. And now we don't have, or they're going to try and remove safer alternatives. Can you imagine if we had this argument, discussions around HIV and AIDS, if we had these discussions around other communicable diseases? It really becomes quite a serious issue. So that's what I think this bill issues, and that's helping people quit smoking at the same time as preventing people from uptake. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Some further inputs, questions from the floor?
Thank you. Mine to the panel, based on the evidence that you presented to us today, why do you think that we ended up with the bill as it is currently? And why is government pushing ahead with it in the current form?
The WHO is the primary reason why we have the bill that we have. Because the WHO doesn't see people who smoke, and it pretends is they are anti the industry. But the main issue is that they don't see people who smoke. And when you look at third world countries, they seem to look at the WHO as a gospel. What they say is gospel. I mean, a few years ago, they gave an award to the Minister of India for banning vaping in India. And that's how the WHO operates. And that's the primary problem. And when you look at OECD countries, where there's capacity for self-determination and agency and making up their minds, they don't listen to what the WHO says. They minds to regulate. You go to the US, FDA. There are products that have been approved by the FDA in all categories. There are vaping products approved by the FDA. Products like snus approved by the FDA. There's heat-not-burn products approved by the FDA. So all these alternatives to combustion, they've asked for the evidence from the and it's been accredited with appropriate claims that can be made to the public based on the evidence that has been put forth. For example, some of the products can talk about a reduced exposure. Some can talk about a public health benefit. Things are based on the evidence that has been provided and has been evaluated by independent people. The unit that looks at tobacco in the US employs more than 11,000 people. So just understand that if you're going to go that route, it's intensive and it requires resources. In the UK, they have vaping acceptable in the national health system. They had a swap program that was launched last for vapes that will be provided by the national health system. If you go to Sweden, we've spoken about Sweden. If you go to Japan, they allowed heated tobacco products into their market in 2015. They've never seen a more rapid decline of tobacco use. And what they've seen is the replacing cigarettes, but the nicotine market coming down, not going up. You know, gateway hypothesis has been debunked. So the main looks like we sit in Africa and we think a brain is only a sex organ. We don't use it for other purposes.
When it comes to policies, a policy is supposed to be written by South Africans for South Africans. But you look at this bill and you compare it with every other bill that is in Africa, they're similar. How is that? Because local context, South Africa is not Uganda, it's not Kenya. We've got our own problems and we know how to. So it's almost a copy and paste approach that's taken by the authorities. I don't. But it's also concerning that countries that we're mentioning here that have cut smoking rates have never been commended by the WHO, although they are reaching their targets sooner. They have never taken a stance to say congratulations to Sweden, congratulations to New Zealand, and likes. Yeah.
One of the things that you need to understand is that anywhere where there's been prohibition, the smoking rates are going up. Everywhere where we embrace risk-reduced products and the continuum of risk, the prevalence is coming down. And the health of people who smoke is improving. One of the things that I will do in Parliament is to ensure that we have a government that does not take sides. A government that says, bring us the evidence, that listens to both sides and makes decisions based on science in the best interest of the population. Now, when you do tobacco regulation that is progressive, that should be supported by health professionals, it's one that improves the health of people who smoke. That should be the lens through which you look at appropriateness. So one of the things that I will ask for is to ensure that the industry comes, the association comes, Council Against Smoking comes. It has to be listened to. And the two sides have to sit at the table, as is a tradition in South Africa. Not one that says, that
that will not be tolerated, because we want the facts to speak for themselves, and that we make policies based on.
Thank you, Doc. There's a further question, Franz?
I'm afraid we are really out of time, but I've got 2 or 3 quick questions that I wanted to ask. I think this is a very interesting conversation that we are having, but I think I want us to debunk. Are we then saying comparatively, I know there is hardly, I don't know in your technical terms what you call it, there's hardly, there's this e-vapes, and then there are nicotine like cigarette, cigar, and so on and so on. Which would you then say it's the much better or the same? I think I heard saying and correct me, saying that there is no nicotine in e-vapes. You correct me, because I think I heard something like that. But now I'm wondering if that is the case, because sometimes when you go by this, the refills, you have like 0.01 and so forth and so forth. What does then that mean? Thank you so much.
So this just to correct there is in e-liquids that are in market, there is some without nicotine. The majority contain nicotine because that's what people need to get off smoking, or that's what they're looking for, the kick of the nicotine. So I think the appropriate thing to say is to bring science to the forefront. The way that most frameworks that are working are that they look at the toxicant continuum, and they actually apply excise according to that. First thing. So what is saying within the same bill, it's not that you need to do a new bill for vaping. It's already in the tobacco bill, but you need to differentiate between the products within the same bill. If you look at the bill for New Zealand, it's completely treated completely with all the elements that are there, but within the same bill. So it's 2 sections. Yeah, one encouraging for these products, but putting the right things in place, like standards, as Asanda said. It's important to have standards. It's important limits, because higher nicotine limits are harmful. It's important to have warnings. It's important to have age restrictions and so on. Certain things like display, you cannot have a display ban on a cigarette, because you want to encourage it. People need to see it. And preferably it has to be next to the harmful, so that people are able to say, oh no, I want that one. What's that about? People about the alternative at display, at point of sale. That's what I can contribute.
Can you just,
Yes.
just to explain the difference?
Yes. So Hardley is an interesting story. Hardley contains tobacco, right? So it's the number of constituents in Hardley are staggering. Yeah. So it's a completely, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it seems when you speak to the regulators, to the portfolio committee, during these public, they don't know the difference, or they know it, they're just ignoring the difference. So there's a huge difference between Hubley, or what, well, it's all the way to the extreme right, versus e-cigarettes, which are to the far left.
Sorry, just your question as well, Perry, if you don't mind, the percentages in nicotine. So there's 0.2, 0. Just explain that.
Okay, so they're used in e-liquid, various strengths of nicotine. Now you've got the two types of nicotine. You've got baseline nicotine, and then you've got nicotine salts. So the reason that we have zero nicotine e-liquid is that even for people who have managed to wean themselves off nicotine, but they still want to just inhaling something until they get to the point where they say, okay, I know I'm off, I know I can quit, and they can stop. And that really is the goal of the industry. People will say, yeah, but, do you sell to under 18s? Well, we don't need to sell to under 18s, okay? Because there's so many smokers that we need to convert from from cigarettes to get them off, okay? And yes, we're not going to sell to under 18s, but I guarantee you if they can't get vapes, they're going to go and get cigarettes, easy to get. They're going to. Many of the schools around the country have a problem with marijuana, easy to access. So what do we need to do when we need to get them off? We're essentially going to start with a very high level of nicotine. If someone walks into one of our stores, they walk in, the voice, you know that sound of someone who smokes heavily. How many packs of cigarettes do you smoke a day? No, I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. We can get them off cigarettes immediately. We can stop that person right there and then they will never touch a cigarette again. But we've got to put them on a very high level of nicotine. So what might we do? We'll use 50 milligram nicotine salt e-liquid. And we'll put them in habit. And I'll get rid of the nicotine. They won't have withdrawal symptoms, but what they're getting rid of is lighting their cigarette and holding it in their hands, and now they're getting the nicotine fix. It's then that a 25 milligram nicotine salt. Then you might move to baseline nicotine, what we call mouth to lung, 18 milligrams or 12 milligrams, and eventually they'll move down to 6 milligrams, and then 3 milligrams, and hopefully at some point to 0, and then quit altogether. For us, there's no greater pleasure than someone that's quit.
Can I just say that? Just to give you a simple example, you have people that take 8 teaspoons of sugar. And if you're asking them to quit from 8 to 0, it's not going to happen. So the way they would quit, they would go to 7, and suddenly they then miss the 8 and go to 8. So vaping allows people who smoke to be able to titrate themselves down and become less nicotine dependent. Now, cigarettes are an all or none phenomenon. It's 8 or nothing. And that's why people can't quit, because you can't move that way, and the relapse rate is high. And clinically shown that you have more people that quit when you use electronic cigarettes than when you use the traditional nicotine replacement therapies that we give them. So you are able to titrate that regard. Just like in alcohol, you have 0% beer to 47% alcohol in spirits. So vaping offers you, as a consumer, the ability to know and reduce those levels, because this is a chemical dependence, and it is dose sensitive and dose related. So if you have yourself down, you have a better chance of weaning yourself off the dependence of this highly addictive chemical.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. I think with the National Press Club, working in collaboration with the Vapor Products Association of South Africa. Of course, bringing together industry practitioners and harm reduction experts. Part of the Press Club's efforts to ensure that we converse as a nation, but also equip ourselves as practitioners within the media and communication with information that assists in how we are able to frame our stories. And as you can hear, there clearly is a need for further dialogue and also keep on sharing more information so as to debunk the bigger players in the space have actually been directing the narrative, and when you come in to change the narrative, it becomes a contested in helping to clear that. And let me now, before we invite Franz Machate, let me thank the panel members, Dr. Letlape, Letlape, and Berry. Thank you so much for your insights. Asanda, thank you. Eddie, I'll remember that. Thank you so much, and ladies and gentlemen, let's just begin. Franz will give us some announcements before we move to the next episodes. Thank you. Franz?
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Franz Machate is my name, as Mr. Modise has indicated. So we are out of time, and I think from the National Press Club and the Vape Products South Africa, Association of South Africa, we must just apologize for that stretch on our time, because I think it's way above the planned time. So without wasting any time, thanks Modise for acknowledging all the speakers. But I think there are very few important people that have made sure that this event tonight happened. Thank you so much. I think we started working on this with NPC over 4 months ago, when we planned on this, and and the day finally happened. Thank you so much. National Press Club Executive Committee as well. Thank you so much. So I think, before I go into the announcements that I have, I think it's very important that I mention that from now going forward, we have just appointed a new secretariat as the National Press Club. And I have been holding the position for the past 2 years, and it was mainly on interim. I have just appointed someone, and I'll go back to my role as the executive committee member of the National Press Club. I'm able to here. I know you're busy, just so that they see. So don't be surprised when you are asking me questions or sending me emails, and I redirect to Nobile. This is Nobile Mahlangu. So she is now our secretariat from now going forward. So I will be redirecting your calls and your emails to her. But her email address is so simple. It's secretariat@nationalpressclub.co.za. Thank you so much, Nobile. Next week, Thursday, on the 4th, we are supposed to have another discussion session with the Department of Tourism. But I think we all know that we're still waiting for Mr. President to make those cabinet appointments. So unfortunately, that will have to be moved somewhere to September. I think also the new minister will have settled, whoever that minister will be. So on the 11th of July, it is that time of the year where we are going to have our annual general meeting as the National Press Club. And I want to invite all of you on behalf of the EXCO to make sure that you attend and you participate in that executive committee meeting, in that AGM. So on the 11th, we will be here from 1800 hours. So that is the next event after this one. And then from there, on the 14th of August, we already have a date. Research Commission, it's also going to be another discussion session. So I also believe that in July, towards the end of July, we are going to have a networking, a members networking as always. Without wasting more time, I think those are the most important announcements that I had to do this evening. Anything? Okay. Oh, yes, cash. So National Press Club is advanced. So we have the machine there. You can just tap your card, swipe whatever you prefer. The raffle ticket. And a raffle ticket is 10 rands each. And I'll give you a tip. Buy as many as possible. That maximizes your chance of winning. So that said, ladies and gentlemen, I think feel free to now serve yourselves. There are 7 dishes there. So please serve yourselves and I will come back. Are you coming, baby? Yeah. And then the raffle. Oh, yes. Okay, yes. You know, I think it's very important that I up first. Please do that. So let's allow them. I think they are tired. We've been drinking and having some refreshments without them having something. So I think let's allow them to go first. And raffle, we'll do raffle almost immediately after the dinner. Thank you so much.